Good morning. Hi, this is Stacy. This is Walking in My Shoes, and we are loving my veteran. Hope everyone is having a wonderful Thursday morning. I have to get coffee in as usual. It's one of those things that's required in life. So I wanted to say good morning to everyone. Y'all know this is Walking in My Shoes. Um, we're going to talk about TBIs today, um, how they happen, signs and symptoms, what the military is doing in light of them. So we're going to talk about all of that great stuff. Don't forget that, good morning, Sarah. Don't forget that today we're going to do Let's Talk, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We all kind of come together. It's kind of like a big family. Um, and we've known, most of us that are on there have done this for months and months and months. And so we're like some big family. And we're going to change the format just a little bit when we first come on, especially since we have so many new people. We're going to kind of go around and address some of y'all's questions and answers, and we can really talk about TBI further if we want to, or whatever topic most is important to you. So let's get started. We're going to talk about TBIs. TBIs are a little different than PTSD. I mean, granted, we've already talked about PTSD causing physical changes to the brain. TBIs also obviously do that. They're called traumatic brain injuries. They rank from mild to severe. The most severe, obviously, is a penetrating wound to the head. Um, and that's going to be an interesting little fact as we get further into this, that a penetrating wound, good morning, Michelle, a penetrating wound is not quite as severe sometimes as we think when it comes to other traumatic brain injuries. So let me first start by saying that since 2000, there have been over 400 reported cases that the VA is currently treating of traumatic brain injuries. 400,000 cases, of traumatic brain injuries that the VA has been treating. So I think that's a pretty significant number of cases. And the sad part is there's so many more cases out there that are going undiagnosed. Sorry, I'll have to hear the baby chicks today. That are going undiagnosed. And there's a lot of reasoning behind that. When we started looking into this project, I have, stacks of research papers, but when we started looking into this, we found that part of it was some veterans that were in combat situations didn't want to report it because they didn't want to be taken away from their job. They wanted to continue to work. They didn't think that they wanted to leave their buddies. They didn't want to admit they had an injury. So these even mild injuries can be a headache, confusion sometimes, nausea, exhaustion. So those are mild cases. And a lot of these guys and women don't want to report that. So they don't do that. And the first thing that we really have to look at is the analogy of TBIs and where they start and what they come from. So you can have a very mild TBI. Most people think, oh, in order to have a TBI, I had to have sustained an injury, like an IED, an accident, something that caused me to hit my head. That is not necessarily true. So let me explain this again. That is not necessarily true. They are finding that a lot of these TBIs actually happen in training. Not necessarily in combat, but in training situations. A bad jump, repetitive shooting, and time at the gun range. The gun range I thought was quite interesting because it has to do with, let me make sure my phone's off, sorry y'all. That has to do with when you're holding that weapon and it's up close to your head, it uses compressed, it's the compression of the gunpowder and the projectile and all of that going through the barrel. And so that just the way that it spins, it's a release of gas, so it creates one compression and then it reverses itself as it's discharged. So they're finding that even people who do repetitive shooting, especially of heavier weapons that are up on their shoulders, by their heads, whatever, are suffering TBIs. And it's that repetitiveness that's causing it. So if your veteran starts to display these signs and they say, well, I didn't hit my head, I didn't do whatever, you as their advocate really need to come and say, look, we need this checked out. There's more going on. I go back and I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but when you look at like Aaron Hernandez, yes, he played football his whole life, so he had a lot of hitting of the head and whatever. But then you take that compared to the one concussion that he was truly diagnosed with, and even to the NFL standards, they say there was only one. He had significant injuries to his brain. And part of it was just the repetitiveness of just the jarring of the head. So you have to think about how your brain sits. Okay, so you have your brain, and it sits inside of your skull, and around your brain to protect it is a fluid. So when you have any jarring to your head, okay, it's going to literally, um, what is this? Sarah says, her vet's exam didn't show anything in Charlotte in 2005. It wasn't until he went to Long Beach and it was suggested by a battle buddy it was finally found. So what happens in your jarring in your brain? So you have like your skull, and then you have like your brain, and there's fluid there. Well, when there's whether it's pressure, like the gun itself going off, or hitting your head, or riding over rough terrain, or jumping and having these kind of injuries go on, your skull, brain, your brain hits the skull. Okay, so just imagine that that's happening over and over and over and over and over again. That is where these TBIs are starting, and they can start minor, and minor TBIs and just the re-hitting of your head will cause brain damage, traumatic brain injury. It's an injury to your brain. So it is important that we understand that as we go through this process. Another big thing that happens when we talk about penetrating wounds, people think, oh my God, they've had a penetrating wound. Yep, and so here's your brain again. The projectile itself goes into the spot, right? And it damages the tissue right there versus the whole jarring of the stuff that goes on. Not saying that a penetrating injury isn't major, but you can have a TBI with a closed head injury. And a lot of people don't see that or get that. So that is something very important to understand. Part of the reasons that we're not doing it, like I said, was the veteran themselves wanted to go back into battle. A lot of officers, it was in a study that was done, and this is pretty sickening. It was actually in a VA study that was done, and a DOD study that was done. A lot of these guys went to their officers and said this. Yeah, the relationship of sleep apnea with the TBI as well is very interesting. It is, and it is systemic sleep apnea versus like if you have the other kind, and it's very different in how they relate. But what they're finding is that they went to their officers and complained, and their officers were afraid. This is really sick. That a lot of these veterans at the time were service members, active duty military, were making stuff up and making their injuries seem worse than they were so that they could get higher accommodations. I'm like, what? Okay, that's an interesting thought. So when they went and complained that they had a TBI or suspected a TBI, a lot of the commanding officers were like, nope, we don't think so. You didn't lose consciousness. You didn't do this. It's just a suck it up, go on, because you're not going to get a Silver Star. You're not going to get a Purple Heart. You're not going to get whatever. And that was in a study that was done by the DOD. And I'm like, hold on, y'all are missing the link. So let's talk a little bit about where TBIs, we know where they come from now, and what you're going to find. One of the words that were used, and this is in a study that is literally, let me read this one, it's Dialogues of the Clinical and Neurosciences. And I can actually, when I finish the PowerPoint with everybody, Vet's officer was told that he was the worst ever. It says in here, the effects of living with these neurobehavioral and the meaning and the significance of being identified as injured greatly influences the quality of life of the individuals and their caregivers. Failure to appreciate these complex but predictable relationships impedes proper assessment and treatment of the individual with the TBI. Because we're not recognizing what they go through and what the caregiver goes through, it is directly impacting the treatment plan. So let me give it to you in a different analogy. If you had sustained, or your veteran had sustained, an injury, a brain injury in a car accident, something totally non-military related, your veteran or your spouse would eventually be treated for whatever was going on emergent wise, and then would go, good morning, Nakia, would go on to a brain center like Shepherd's or one of those to learn how to live with a traumatic injury, with a brain injury. Okay, and there's everything from rehab physical to occupational rehab. So you would have done that from early on. And what's happening with our veterans is it's taking them so long to get diagnosed. And when they are diagnosed, the caregivers are not part of all of that that goes on. So they're not part of the care plan always. And so what happens is that it is greatly affecting, in a negative way, it is affecting the treatment of the veteran and the spouse's general overall mental well-being. So a TBI is truly affecting both. So areas of the brain and what happens. Frontal lobe. You'll have lack of focus, irritability, language difficulty. That happens when there's an injury to the frontal lobe. Okay, so we go on there. Sarah says, I have a friend whose son was shot and he's trying to go to Shepherd's. He lost his wife due to anger. She left him, wouldn't tell the doctors that he was being mean, so it just got worse. Yeah, Shepherd, and tomorrow we're going to really talk about Shepherd's and the TBI clinic they have at Shepherd's, because that is flippin' amazing. Amazing. So if they have lack of focus, if they're irritable, if they have difficulty getting the words out a lot of times, that is due to a frontal lobe injury. So any of you who are living with veterans who have these symptoms, now you're like, oh my God, so it's not just him, it's not just me. If there is damage to the temporal lobe, they're going to have problems with their short and long-term memory. You know, it's like that song that never ends thing that goes on, right? You know, because they forget. And you're like, well, I just told you. But you didn't, and I just told you. And you're going to go back and forth through this, and they forget over and over and over and over again. And you get frustrated because you think they're not listening, and in reality, it is damage to their temporal lobe. Okay, so that happens. If it's in the parietal lobe, they have difficulty with reading and spatial misconceptions. So they're going to find that if they read something, they may not comprehend it. They may not be able to get the words into their brain like they're supposed to. So that happens a lot. And that spatial misperception is, the only way I can describe it is the very first time, this is going to tell you, I'm getting old, y'all, when I got bifocals, it looked like a curb was like 6 feet tall. So I'm like marching instead of walking. It was really kind of weird. When it's back in the occipital lobe, they have blind spots and blurred vision. That also happens. As you get further down the brain, closer to the brainstem, which manages the stuff, if it's in the cerebellum, they'll have difficulty walking and slurred speech. So a lot of times it will mimic that of a stroke. And if it is a brainstem injury, they're going to have changes in breathing and difficulty swallowing. So that is much more of a systemic issue when it gets down further. So it's kind of strange that as you think about the brain, that the key part of the brain that regulates your breathing and heart rate and all that stuff is literally found back here at your brainstem, right? Where it goes into your spinal column. And as you work your way forward, it becomes less and less of a life-sustaining thing. So for those of you who are dealing with this, now you kind of understand. And it's very difficult to understand sometimes, and it's very difficult to go through the processes. And so what we have found in doing this research is a lot of times they're treating symptoms. And this was a study that was done by Mayo and by the American Journal of Medicine that came out and said, the problem we have now is we know nothing about combat TBI. Okay, so we know nothing. We are so far behind the eight ball in this because they're getting it. They know they have it, but they're so far behind in treatment. And there's a timeline on here that I want to share with you because I thought this was quite interesting. And this comes from the traumatic brain injury from the VA's research, okay? So the very first thing, this is interesting to me. Since 2000 to now, there are over 400,000 diagnosed TBIs, okay? But it wasn't until 2008 that the VA established a brain bank to collect and study the post-mortem human brain and spinal cord tissue to better understand the effects of trauma on the human nervous system. So they didn't even start, and they were only dealing with people who had died post-mortem. This was in 2008. They have had these kind of brain injuries in modern day since 2000. It's gone on way before that, okay? In 2012, 4 years later, they discovered chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a degenerative disease linked to repeated head trauma such as a concussion in the brains of 4 veterans after their death. It took them, again, that long to figure that out. 4 years. And again, they're only dealing with people after they're dead. So in 2013, they founded 2 consortiums to improve the treatment of PTSD and mild TBIs. I'm like, alright, so now we're like 12 years into from 2000 to now. We're finally going to get together 12 years later and come up with a plan here. In 2014, they developed the Boston Assessment of Traumatic Brain Injury. It's the first post-combat semi-structured clinical interview to characterize head injuries and diagnose TBIs. This is in 2014. In 2014, we're finally coming up with that. In 2016, they identified the cerebellum as particularly vulnerable to repeated blast injuries. Now, we're talking about when we walk through our stages, we had that frontal lobe, the temporal, the parietal, the occipital. That cerebellum sits right above the brainstem. And they're getting these in blast injuries. So it took them that long to figure that out. In 2017, they published the results from a long-term study of tracks, and I'll explain that in a minute, on the consequences of psychological and brain trauma following a TBI. So it's taken them now 17 years to realize that there is psychological problems that are coming from having a TBI. Just like Sarah said, it's difficult for them to understand because their brain isn't processing information correctly anyway because of the injury. And now they don't get it. They know there's something wrong, but they don't comprehend how it all goes together. But it has taken them 17 years to figure that out. Ask Sarah how long it took her veteran to figure out there's something wrong. 17 years. 17 years for that to happen. In 2018, they discovered that functional brain networks that actually interfere with pain perception are disrupted by mild TBIs in post 9/11 veterans and service members with and without chronic pain. So it's taken you a long time to get to these points. And in 2019, they began a limbic study, a 5-year study to better understand the long-term impact of TBI. They will not have that done till 2024. So 24 years later, we're finally going to figure this out. It's a wonder they're frustrated. It's a wonder as caregivers we are frustrated. It is ridiculous in that number. Okay? TBIs are linked to ringing in the ears. They're finding that female veterans with TBIs are not being included in the research like they should be. They know that there are now protein markers in the blood that are coming up, and they're saying, hey, look, these are blast-related TBIs that are going on. Veterans with a history of TBI are more than twice as likely to die by suicide. Veterans with moderate to severe TBIs require rehabilitative services even 5 years after the injury. They're even finding that mild cases of this are requiring life-changing stuff. And so what I want to share, and this is kind of insane, this is a newsletter from 2014, Veteran Affairs TBI Model System Network. They have a few VA hospitals that deal with TBI. One is in Minneapolis, one is in Richmond, Virginia, one is in Palo Alto, California, one is in San Antonio, Texas, and one is in Tampa. Okay? That's it. That's all they have. That's it. That's all there is, are those few places. And so when you look at the number of veterans that are affected by this, it makes like 0 sense to me. One of the good things I did read, which I thought was kind of interesting, is that we are told so often that if you have a TBI, you're going to end up with Alzheimer's. And the research, according to Mayo and Johns Hopkins, is that's not true yet. They can't prove that yet. If you already have markers that from your family, it may make that worse. But a lot of what they're seeing is the injury to the brain. And doctors aren't aware of this, so they're saying, I think they're getting dementia. Nope, they're forgetting things because their temporal lobe is damaged. And so that creates a fear, okay? It creates a fear. It creates a fear when your veteran starts to think, oh my gosh, I can't think, I now have Alzheimer's. Oh my goodness, I can't remember, I now have dementia. And we've heard it. So we're thinking, oh my gosh, are they always going to have dementia? Are they always going to have Alzheimer's? No, they're not necessarily. There is not a direct correlation yet. There's not enough research out there to definitely say that. And that's from Johns Hopkins and from Mayo Clinic, both are places which I trust completely. 5-year outcomes. This is the 5-year outcome. Yeah, how can they prove it when it takes nearly 20 years to figure out what a damn TBI is and what it does to them? That's what I'm saying. That's why I'm using outside research facilities other than Mayo, okay? So there's not enough data to prove that. They're not saying it doesn't happen. They're saying there's not enough data that directly links it together. So here's the 5-year outcome of persons with TBI. 22% died. 30% became worse. 22% stayed at home. And there was only 26% improved. So when you look at that, you're like, oh, those numbers are pretty staggering. Long-term negative effects. This is, let me tell you where it came from here. This is moderate to severe traumatic brain injury. It's a lifelong condition. This comes right from the CDC. so it's pretty research stuff here. They're 50 times more likely to have seizures. They're 11 times more likely to die of an accidental drug poisoning or overdose. Part of it is because of memory loss. They don't remember if they took their medicines or not. They are 9 times more likely to get infection and 6 times more likely to develop pneumonia. There's a lot of other costs that have to do with their family and what it costs society, because we're not even thinking about dealing with it. So these costs to society are even increasing. 57% are moderately to severely disabled. 55% do not have a job but were employed at the time of the injury. 50% return to the hospital at least one time. 33% rely on others for help with everyday activities. 29% are not satisfied with their quality of life. 29% go to illicit drugs or misuse alcohol. And 12% are residing in nursing homes. So it is time that we really begin to pay attention to the TBI. We, again, sweep this stuff under the rug. We do it all the time. CDC recommends that we diagnose this early. So we have this total disagreement between DOD and VA and CDC recommendations. Diagnose it early, treat it early. I'm like, what? Diagnose it early, treat it early. The medication chart that goes with it, the side effects are horrific. Again, I will put that out there so y'all can read this stuff. I'll put all the links to all the stuff that we have found out there so you can read the information for yourself, because I think it is pretty impressive. Cohen did an amazing study, and of course they're an outside agency, which I think makes it even better. They did an amazing study on traumatic brain injury, and I just think it's one of those things that we just need to pay attention to. And we're not doing enough. We're not doing enough for our veterans. So, it's like the more I do, and I really, I can't say this enough for everybody who is involved. We are the advocates, and our closed group has 300 people in it. But we came here, the 300 people who came to this group, came here because we want to help our veterans. We came to these groups because we want a better quality of life with our veterans and our relationships. We came here because we are the advocates. What about those that don't? I'm with you, sister. Cannabis and Zola. We're going to talk about a crud ton of new treatments that are available that do not require drugs, which is impressive. Tomorrow, that deal with both that deal with PTSD and TBI combined, and TBI separately. So we're the ones who deal with it. We're their advocates. I did a series a couple weeks ago about being disposable. Our veterans' usefulness is over. Their usefulness to this country is over. They're no longer active duty. Their usefulness is over. And it's kind of like when your kids outgrew their toy. And I can remember my kids having little baby four-wheelers, right? And when they outgrew them, they got kind of put up on the shelf, and then they got dusty and dirty, and they faded, and they did whatever in the garage, and then we got rid of them. Because obviously my 9-year-old at the time, my 9-year-old kid can't ride with the 2-year-old, right? And I think that's kind of where we feel with our veterans sometimes. That their usefulness is over. So we don't need you, just put you in the corner somewhere in the closet, let you create dust. Eventually you'll die and go away. And if you don't die and go away, we're going to give you enough drugs to make you a zombie. Boone talked about that all the time. He responded like a good little zombie. Those were his words in his book. Give him the drugs, make him a good little zombie. Because I guess giving him drugs and making him a good little zombie is better than going into these brain injuries and starting to fix them and work on them. You know, if you had that brain injury from a car wreck from day one, you would be going somewhere and your family would be part of your care and you would be learning how to redo things and how to make life better for somebody with a brain injury, how to help them with short-term memory, how to help them with long-term memory, how to help them when they can't, when they're having a hard time reading, how to help them stay focused and stay on task. You would learn that as soon as their life-sustaining injuries were fixed and corrected. You would learn that from day one. The minute you go get treatment, and that happens like from a car injury or a fall or whatever in the real world, in the non-military world, that happens as soon as their life-threatening injuries are stabilized and they no longer require that. They immediately go to get treatment to work on TBIs, on traumatic brain injuries. And so it's family based. And so the caregivers learn and the patients learn and everybody learns how to work together on an individualized plan to help them deal with that specific injury. And we don't do that for our veterans. We guess. They're not disposable. And for those of you who deal with this every day, Sarah, I know you do. I know you deal with it every single day. Sue, you deal with it every day. Not only do you deal with it and watch that you're going through this, but you watch your veterans struggle and you watch the fear in their eyes. And we shouldn't have to watch that fear. Michelle, you deal with it. We shouldn't have to watch that fear in their eyes. Elizabeth, you're right. They give them that little stuff and say, here you go. And they make them little good people, and doesn't matter if it helps or not. There are people, I have witnessed it firsthand from the EMS side, that have had such traumatic brain injuries that they really should have been vegetables their whole life, that are out functioning today and understand what's going on. They get what's going on because they've done it from day one. I don't know how you guys do this. I don't know how you do this. How do you do this? When you see the fear in their eyes, when you live with the uncertainty, when you feel like nobody is helping you, when you feel like your veteran is disposable, they just give a stronger dose. Yep, they do. And it's sad that, and Nakia will tell you this, it is sad that we as the spouses and the family and the support structure have to almost get our degree in medicine to realize that this is how it works. To be their part about it is, oh my God. I'm reading this. I'm sorry. The funny part about cannabis is that the battle buddy that was supposed to help my vet and keep him out for smoking it. That's ridiculous. Ridiculous. We gonna talk about that later. We're gonna talk about the better support later as we go down the road. But if you don't have your degree, if you don't sit here and pour through piles and piles and piles and piles of research, and you don't start looking at the sources of the research, and you don't start getting it from day one, that's the only way our veterans are going to get care. And what about those that don't have anybody? You didn't get your degree in medicine, but you're having to learn it. Nakia is probably the best doctor on the planet. When I get sick, I'm going to her, because Sister has learned everything about medicine. Yeah, I think we just need to have a pot smoke in, because cannabis helps me. I mean, it is what it is. It's legal in a whole lot of states now because they're knowing that. But this is nuts. You guys are so amazing. And I can't imagine what it's like to be in your shoes on a daily basis. And I'm so in awe of you who deal with this every day and who go on and say, I can't do this anymore. Every veteran needs that advocate. And Sue, Sarah, all y'all, I appreciate all y'all are on here. Erica, Michelle, all of you that, and I know I'm missing people, who are the advocates for your veterans. You are those advocates. And there's so much going on. I just sat here this morning and I'm like, there's not enough of me. There's not enough of me to do this. We need, we have actually split Loving My Veteran into two parts. There's the Loving My Veteran support group, and then there is Project Your Voice, where we're dealing with big issues. The lack of health care, the drugs that are just horrifically given out like candy and following the pharmaceutical money, the poisoned water that we're not realizing the effects of for 30 years down the road. And then this, when you start putting it all together, there's only one of us, and I'm like, ah. So anybody who has a passion behind a project, if and I know that 1 hour of time, 10 minutes of time, whatever, is more than we had before. If you were passionate about researching and doing and getting information out and helping us gather that information to get it out on TBIs, let us know, because we really would love to have the help. There is a few of us, and we can't do it all. And the more you research, the more it's like almost like squirrel. You get carried down this path that is very ugly. Yeah, pharmacy teching in school is super important. I mean, yeah, because you learned enough. I mean, I learned enough from being a paramedic. I'm probably enough to be dangerous. But I learned that when I started reading this stuff, I was like, ooh, stop right there. So anybody who has passion and wants to do the research and help, if you guys just do the research, we can help put it into plans. But it's going to take a whole group of people fighting this system and become where they're not disposable anymore. We have to become that for them. We have to become that for ourselves. I love that man. He's not disposable. He may not matter to another soul in this world, but he matters to me. And that's enough to keep me fighting every single day. And I will continue to keep fighting every single day as long as the good Lord lets me have a breath and a voice. And I have a very big one. That's Carl. So I know I've ranted for a very long time. I'm sorry, y'all. This is just passionate, and it just irritates the snot out of me. So y'all, come to Let's Talk tonight. It's on our event page. Good morning, Sophia. We're getting ready to get off of here. Now you're going to have to watch it on the replay. Sophia is another great resource. She's another great resource. Miss Nurse and her gentle diet. And I just love these people. But y'all, let's get passionate. Let's get our decisions here. Let's fight for our veterans, because one, I love one, and I'm going to fight with him everything that's in me. And I think that's where we all are. All right, y'all, I'm off of here. This has been Walking in My Shoes. I'm Stacy. This is Loving My Veteran. Remember, everything on here, we're not paid counselors. We're not the experts. If you need help, reach out and get it. And everything is copyrighted to Loving My Veteran, as usual. Try to get all these on YouTube. It's one of those things that are just tough to do. So whatever we can do. Hey, Sophia, you tell your patients that give them all a hug for me today, because I used to do that a lot, and I love those people to death, because I just think that those patients just need to be uplifted like our veterans and everybody else. So So please give your patients a hug from me today. Erica, you're welcome. I don't do much. I just have a big voice, and you can't shut me up. So this is kind of like my passion in life. So again, anybody who wants to help, send us a message, send us an email. Anything you can do would just be amazing, and we would take every bit of it, of the help we got. Y'all have a blessed day. Y'all pop on tonight. We're going to change the format around a little bit. Sarah, we'd love for y'all to join us if you got time tonight. Erica, all y'all. Sophia, you need to bring your gentle giant to come visit us because we would love him. Maybe he could teach Carl a few things. Y'all have a good night. Bye.